It may be, but that doesn't mean that that's the way the economy is constructed in everyday life. So we need to begin to explore this. And only then can we, I think, begin to say, now we begin to develop the tools that we need. You know, I shouldn't make it so linear, because I think you have to do all this simultaneously. Right? To start to begin to look at the empirical and to say, what kind of concepts do I need to make sense of this? Right? That might open up the possibilities. And as I do that, I need to engage in these conversations. I need to do what is in one sense the easiest kind of research for us, which is look at the cultural representations and discourses of the economy. And to ask why economies have become so affectively charged, you know? Why people seem to think of themselves now not as, you know, if in the past 50 years to be human was to communicate, not anymore. I think now to be human is to enter into the market, right? And so Africa isn't, you know, what are we doing to try to bring Africa into the world of humanity? We're trying to bring them into the market, you know. We don't care about education. We don't care about any of that shit. We just want them to have good government, and good government is defined by the ability to create markets. And, you know, so how is all this being constructed? And in that process, and I think it has to be a collaborative work. You know, what I've just described would take 3 lifetimes. And in some cases, I'm not qualified to even enter into some of these conversations. So I have a new graduate student who's a mathematician by training, who's working with me to read through neoclassical. I'm probably going to write a book with 2 other people, one of whom is an economist. I think it's a much more, and that's only the beginning, because of course I'm still working with the problematic assumption for the moment that you can isolate something called economies, right? So I then have to say, okay, so as I get here, now I still have to do the real work of putting the economy back into all of the complexity of relationships to the state, to culture, to social relations, to identity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, but that's okay. I mean, you know, I think we have gotten ourselves into too much of an assumption about temporality of intellectual work. You know, as if we need to produce the book tomorrow, and it needs to change, and the world has to change within 2 weeks, or else I'm a failure. You know, Marx spent decades working on these projects. Great books don't get turned out. You know, I mean, Jim Carrey used to say that he was kind of old-fashioned man. He didn't think graduate students should publish. He didn't think dissertations should be published. Why would you think that after, you know, a graduate student had something to say worth publishing as a book? You know, I mean, work on the book for 10 years, right? I mean, educate, you know, your education continues. I mean, you know, this kind of, we bought into a temporality, which both demands, you know, if the book doesn't change the world immediately, it's somehow a failure. We forget that, you know, Freud's books sold, I don't know, 100 copies when they were released, you know, but look what over a century, you know, not to say cultural studies is Freud, but the temporality of intellectual work isn't the same as the temporality of the market. And you know, as the market has dominated more and more inside the university, we kind of turn out these books. You know, and you know, this is a project that probably will take me 10 years. I mean, most of my books take me 10 years. I write a book about every 10 years or so. This one may take 20, you know? And that will only be the first volume, because, as I say, you know, it would be like a revisioning of political economy, but then I have to do revisioning the conjuncture now with the political economy inserted back into it. So, you know, when I die, you know, someone hopefully will publish my unpublished notes, and then I won't have to listen to the criticisms. Well, you know, that's a great question, and that's one. Someday I'm going to have to figure out the answer to that, because when I went to Birmingham, The difference between the British New Left and the American New Left and the counterculture is the American New Left didn't really, we didn't read Marx. If some of the SDS people, and I was in SDS, but some of them read Marx and took it seriously. Most of us were reading C. Wright Mills and, anything we could find that was kind of a critique of the social formation. And so, whereas the British New Left, of course, it wasn't that it was Marxist, but it was a critique of Marxism, right? It was largely post-colonial subjects, and working class subjects who were kind of arguing Marx can't answer our questions. We want to understand what this invasion of Egypt means in 1954, was it? Or 6. Marx doesn't seem to give us the answers. So it was a struggle with Marx. So I get to Birmingham and, Marx is on the agenda. And it's been on my agenda ever since. In some ways, obviously my work is always on the terrain of Marxism. I would describe myself as a materialist. I think Marx was perhaps I don't know if he was the first, but certainly for me, the first radically contextual social analyst. Marx was trying to develop, I think, a historically specific theory of historically specific conjunctures. Right? So, in a way, it was a model for me. In a way, obviously, if you're going to struggle with capitalism, which one has to do in understanding the contemporary world, Marx is always the beginning, but Marxism was never quite. I was never quite comfortable with Marxism, so it's always put in conjunction for me. So I always describe my theoretical position as the between of Gramsci and Foucault and Deleuze, right? And somewhere in between there. I can't give up my Marxism, although I prefer kind of a Gramscian articulation of Marx. But there are some crucial texts of Marx for me. But I can't just rest there. That isn't enough for me. It doesn't give me enough. And so there's another half. And I keep moving back and forth. Obviously as my work turns to economics more, I'm drifting over toward Marx and I'm pulling back and resisting it and saying, no, but that doesn't work. But yes, but capital and, the circuit of production, yes, but. So Marx is always, I think, the one of those people I will always have to struggle with. And I suppose one way of describing what everyone wishes they could become, in a way, although I'm not so ambitious, is, to write the next Grundrisse. If Marx gave an analysis of the conjuncture, wouldn't it be nice if someone else gave it? Someone could do that today, not to be a Marxist, but to reinvent what Marx tried to reinvent. I think that's, for example, why Hart Negri's Empire, is so important. I think it's wrong, right? But it is an attempt to rethink the conjuncture, right? And for that, Michael's a friend of mine, and for that, he and I admire the book immensely for its ambition, to try to re-describe the conjuncture. And I think it fails miserably in many ways, but I think it's part of that project.